A reading from Dreams of Amputation by Gary J. Shipley. Wary of the possibility of additional security, Nolan abandons his car a quarter mile short of the lab. He takes the long black bag from the boot and then proceeds to push the car into a ditch by the side of the road. Access points to the lab's supply tunnels are invariably left unguarded, as any security measures are implemented at point of entry, where each tunnel connects with a lab's storage facility. After climbing down off the road and weaving his way through various concrete hoardings, Nolan finds that today is no exception and that the elevator is unmarked, enabling him to slip inside the supply tunnel unchallenged. Once inside, still unsure as to whether he has been seen accessing the tunnel, his limited vision preventing him from properly surveying his surroundings, he starts trying to locate a suitable canister. After an excruciatingly long wait, Nolan finally finds a large rapid-access canister and immediately excavates it from a conduit. He breaks the seal holding the lid down and empties it of its contents, test tubes, cool boxes, vials, etc., dumps his bag inside, and climbs in after it, neglecting to replace the lid. Nolan knows that once he reattaches the lid, the canister will be airtight. He also knows that the security system will command that the canister collapse in on itself if the lid is not sealed in place, crushing into minimum mass whatever is inside. The machinery only allows closed regulation canisters to pass into a lab storage area. The sealed canisters are bomb-proof and are quarantined for a period sufficient to see out the capacity of any artificial respiration systems that might be employed by a potential interloper. Security can afford to be lax on the outskirts, allowing deliveries to run smoothly and efficiently, because where it matters, where a lab breach is at stake, the conditions are in place to recognize and annihilate any potential threats that might have infiltrated the tunnels. But in addition to all this, Nolan also knows that it is expedient for certain deliveries to evade quarantine, and that where the contents of certain canisters are considered urgent, there is a procedure in place to recognize and segregate such containers. All establishments of significance, from the labs to each block of Scepter Field Park, are eager to maintain the secrecy of their particular procedure, and even that they have one in operation at all. Getting hold of some canned air was not a problem for anyone, and for Nolan easier still, as squad cars, unmarked or otherwise, had them fitted in the boot as standard. The frequency of underground criminality resulting in conflagration was such that, though not a regular occurrence, it was nevertheless considered prudent to equip all law enforcement with the requisite equipment. Knowledge of how to cheat intake security measures was not so readily available, and Nolan's being privy to it came with the job. That said, Nolan is still beginning to feel the general encroachment of the seemingly coincidental, for although suction pads were also fairly common in police vehicles, offering supplementary control should the main target and lock device falter, among other things, he didn't carry them in his car. He'd taken the set now stashed in his black bag from the boot of the dead patrolman's car, and this worried him. Had he not begun to realize the inherent precariousness of his position, regardless of what action he decided to take, he might have started second-guessing himself into some apoplectic spasm of indecision. Instead, he unzips the bag and prepares its contents for use. As Nolan pulls the lid across the top of the canister, he sees the lights in the chamber change from blue to orange, indicating that he is nearing the entrance to Lab South 5's storage dock. His face screens lighting the confines of the container. Nolan detaches the mask from the end of the oxygen canister and inserts the pipe directly into his neck. He attaches one suction pad to the floor of the canister and another to the inside of the lid, connects them with the digital ratchet device, and watches as it begins drawing them closer together. When the ratchet device stops, having sensed the optimum pressure level before incurring damage to the surfaces to which it is attached, Nolan checks that the lid is secure by slamming his palms into it as hard as he can. He detects no movement. Nolan is still taking a risk, and he knows it. There is no guarantee that the system has not been modified, that the broken seal will now not draw more attention as a result of those modifications, regardless of how securely the lid is in place, and even if the cracked seal is not picked up on, recovery times, even of urgent canisters, can still differ considerably depending on volume, leaving Nolan to suffocate inside before ever gaining access to the storage facility, but feeling the full weight of the odds stacked against him, and having no other means of getting his hands on Smithson, Nolan puts these concerns from his mind. As he curls up around his weapon, he feels his mind being dragged back to the last time he'd folded up in a confined space to avoid detection. Back in the issue grays, seams carving up his limbs, cuffs stiff as bog rolls, and collar Litzen dragging in under the chin like a heretic's fork, Nolan takes one look at the shallow recess in the floor and sets his waddle swinging. Fuck do you take me for? There's plenty of room, Nolan. Quit your bleating, says Koki, Nolan's superior by a single colored square, shit-eater smirk perming mouth ends either side of his profoundly acuminate greyhound head. You really are a lame cunt. Koki pushes his gloves hands deep into the ratty pockets of his charcoal bone sack and shrugs his plaited shoulders. And you'll be over there, says Nolan, pointing to a damaged section of fiberboard paneling on one of the factory's external walls. Uh-huh. Measure it if you want. It's no bigger. At least you get to lie down. I'm not feeling the privilege. We run into the remainder before reinforcements get here and we're screwed. There's not many left. But they're more than us, a lot more. I don't see what else. There will be lab trucks and grunts all over this place in less than an hour, so crawling into the floor and the walls don't exactly strike me as necessary. It's them that want to be hiding. And when they do, it'll be somewhere like here. And seeing that they're caught in a shrinking circle, who's to say it won't be here? You're pretty pessimistic for a guy who spends most of his time falling out of planes. Pessimism's got fuck all to do with it. We hide and we can relax. We can buy ourselves some time and, if need be, the potential for a shock assault. What? Wait, here it comes. Shit, can you believe they think it fucking needful to remind me of your rank? Nolan sidles up to Koki and curtsies. Saves me having to do it, says Koki, only half joking. The sooner these fuckers are done running, the better. Who needs this shit going off in their head? Careful, Nolan. Let's not forget what your brain, infinitesimal as it is, would look like if you brought it along for the ride. As chewed up as your shitter, so the story goes. You'd have more in there than the old protocol nudge, that's for sure. So the story goes. You saw the encephalic honeycomb on initiation. Yep, and I ain't seen one since. And that disappoints you? What, you think they buried that poor sod's brain in the ground and let the worms mistake it for mud? No. I believe an invisible airborne plague devoured it like it's devoured the brains of schismatists all over, and that they are determined to perpetuate its spread. But the fact that I believe it doesn't make it true. It's an explanation. But how can I be sure it's the best one? So you'd be happy to risk ending up like them just to satisfy your curiosity? That's the problem. Not sure I can see anything wrong with them. You've heard what they believe, what they do. Heard, but not seen. All I see is people running and fighting in panic. They think we're murderers. It's not until the shot's in them that they lose that look in their eyes, like they've seen. It's just the heads. That's what they're designed to do. They're fine once they've been through the labs. You've seen them afterwards. You've fought alongside them. You can't possibly deny the improvement. The fear's gone, says Nolan, his tone unequivocal. They repair the damage. It's the damage that makes them run and fight in the first place. All of a sudden, that hole in the floor is looking a lot more appealing. Don't let me stop you. Nolan climbs down into the shallow trench, lays his weapon alongside him, and starts dragging some spare fiber boards over the top of him. Wake me in spring, he says, as Koki slides the last board into place over the hyphenated yellow ovals of his eyes. Koki takes one last look out onto the street. It is bereft of life. The only thing he can see that had once laid claim to a heartbeat is the mangled corpse of one of the schismatist's cats. They keep those things in their homes, and Nolan can't see anything wrong with him, he thinks. Fucking guy wants looking at. He can hear the rumbling of the mobile labs in the distance, and wonders if Nolan hadn't been right about there being no need to hide this close to the end. But with Nolan already interred, he sides with caution and proceeds to sepulcher himself in the wall. The cavity is the result of some clumsy pipe removal. Instead of filling the now defunct space, they'd simply left it. They'd even done a hack job on the fiberboard panel, which makes it easy for Koki to prise away from the stud work and then pull back into position. All the while, the factory remains empty. Nolan has no problem keeping his breathing under control. He can fidget at will, and he knows that if he starts sweating the confinement too much, he can always dislodge the top board for a few minutes to calm his nerves. But all this changes when 15 schismatist combatants happen upon the factory. They've been concealed in their incommodious sanctums for about half an hour when they turn up. The moment when Nolan and Koki first hear the metal shutter roll up, they both hope, laced with a certain amount of presumption that it is their own men, but nevertheless they stay put, neither of them relishing the ignominy of being seen excavating themselves from their hideaways like craven mice. Their reluctance is rewarded on hearing their visitors talking in that unmistakably schismatic argot. "Is there safety here?" asks a lad of about 15, his bottom lip cut and puffy, carrying a fat tabby cat, its legs hanging flaccid, then stiffening from a dream. "There is a resistance and a fated brush," says a woman of an age to be his mother. "The safety spoken of might imply unmentioned things." "The windows will have eyes on the inside," says a flint-faced man, wearing the still execrable eyes of a basilisk, as he points out positions to various men and women, the top half of their heads mantled with black beanies, who scurry obediently into place. Nolan is feeling it, his brain not only seeming to be inside his discrepant bovid skull, but doing its best to burst its way out. Koki is faring better, due in no small part to his being able to observe through a slim crack in the fiberboard the movements of his enemy, and so train his weapon on any that happen to approach his location. "They'll be resting in the consumption of food in shifts," says the man given to making orders. 6 beanie heads man the windows, their heads flicking to and fro like prairie dogs, while the rest of them sit in a corner with 2 stretchered bodies and eat from tins and silver packets. "Will food nourish where it is not taken?" asks the boy. "Rest will be determined, will be nourishment enough for now," replies an old man, massaging the phlebitis in his calves. "There needs to be trust that commitment wasn't in any way greed-related," says a man dressed in denim and missing a hand. "That trust is deserved, it's been earned," replies the old man. "What is it exactly that's deserving of trust?" asks the woman of an age to be the boy's mother. The thin man lets out a malefic titter. The old man stares down at his blown veins and fights against the profanity that is shame. Of the ways to disappear, this is currently among the least useful, says the man, given to orders through a mouthful of food. There is truth, says the thin man. Where there should be silence, is the peremptory man's response. And noiselessness is observed by all. Nolan longs for them to resume their aimless bickering, thus allowing him the opportunity to make minute adjustments in his limbs, which serves to stave off cramp and help divert his attention away from the vulnerability of his predicament. He feels every second of his body's inertness. 10 minutes pass without noise or incident. Once again, Koki has an easier time, for he has sensed a growing unease in the beanie heads at the windows. Their movements have become progressively twitchy, and their glances back at the seated group more frequent. Contaminants, says a woman at a north-facing window. Those located on the east and west walls echo her warning. With the south-facing wall offering no means of observation or exit, they are effectively surrounded. Both Nolan and Koki celebrate with a deep draw of air. The building will be rigged as is keeping with non-acquiescence, says the peremptory man. Nolan and Koki cut short their celebration. An absence of coercion should be heard as truth, says the woman of an age to be the boy's mother. The boy looks at her. The woman looks at him. As it has been, says the old man, unzipping a green satchel. The beanie heads gather round, and the old man hands out a small device to each of them, which they handle gingerly. The boy becomes increasingly restless. Time needs to be allocated, says the woman. There's all the time till it's done, says a beanie head, returning to her lookout. Certain that nobody but the boy is watching her, the woman mouths the words, Go. He gets to his feet and starts backing towards the exit. His eyes do not stray from her. Come with me, he screams at her. She looks away as everyone else glowers in his direction. Infection, hollers the old man. I'm sorry, I'm scared. Don't stay here. Please don't stay here. The boy stops moving and scans their faces. 13 guns are trained on his head. The woman of that age hides her eyes in her lap, shaking. If the infection is still present after 10, it will be eradicated, says the peremptory man. Mom! He roars, his vision befogged with tears. 10, 9, 8, all but the mother count in concert. The boy runs for the shutter, slides it up just far enough to scramble underneath, and is out on the street as they count off the number 3. One of the beanie heads rolls the shutter back down to the floor, and they all resume the various tasks allotted to them by circumstance: to watch, to defend, to cease. The thin man shakes his head. All that time running, and what? Says the mother without raising her head. And the contagion was in attendance, the thin man continues. Koki has used the distraction to push the wall panel out enough to enable him to turn around and hold his rifle horizontally. As the commotion ends, he is facing the raw blockwork that separates him from the street. Nolan, too, has made use of the cover. He's dislodged one of the boards across his face so that he can see out. Although the board isn't raised up far, he is still running the risk of being spotted. But then, if he is going to have a chance of evading the explosion, he is going to have to do something. He figures he has a few minutes before the reinforcements make the schismatist's position untenable. Lifting the board an inch or two more, he can see the lump that has formed recently in the wall, where Koki is holed up. He's going to move any moment, he thinks. Koki is obviously in the best position to initiate an assault, So Nolan decides to give him a couple of minutes to do just that, at which time he will hasten a resolution alongside him. Nolan has counted off 30 of 120 when he hears Koki's gun blasting. He is about to burst free of the door of the floor when he hesitates. Koki is still nowhere to be seen, and neither are the effects of his gunshots. The only difference Nolan can see are the bursts of yellow fog emitting from their cracks in the wall. The schismatists all look on, stupefied, their feet slowly shuffling them backwards. Nolan begins to extricate himself from what he feels sure is only a few minutes away from becoming his grave, should he remain immobile. The gunshots end. Nolan crawls across the uneven floor to an upturned workbench, its 6 legs splayed and bent, protruding skyward, like a dead insect. After the dust has cleared, a female beanie head approaches the damaged section of wall. She smashes the loose wall panel free from its housings and steps back as the wet night air washes in through a ragged hole in the blockwork. She rushes to replace the panel, and 2 others are quick to assist her. Having reached the workbench, Nolan makes use of the sudden efflux of communication, loud and perfervid amongst the schismatists, and pulls the workbench up onto its side, shielding himself behind it. They are going to blow the place at any moment. About that, Nolan has no doubt. The gunfire and the subsequent discovery of the hole in the wall have rattled them. They sense that the ability to control their fates is slipping away fast, and they have no intention of submitting to capture. They begin to charge their devices. Lying flat to the ground, all but his head and the barrel of his rifle hidden behind the workbench, Nolan aims at the peremptory man and fires. The shot hits him just below the left ear and explodes on impact. His head, neck, and right shoulder disintegrate in an instant, returning to the eye as a piece of pointillist sculpture scattered across the faces and bodies of his comrades. Nolan takes out 2 more before any of them are in a position to return fire. As he rolls back behind the worktop, he hears a voice from outside demanding immediate capitulation. A voice so stentorian as to drown out the report of their weapons. Sensation of extreme heat in his left thigh. Silence. White burn of magnesium sun. Black tang of star-scrubbed night. One of the schismatists had detonated his device in error, killing himself and all but one of his comrades, who, though incapacitated, didn't die until 2 days later, with an immediacy that prevented any of the others from detonating their own devices. This man's ineptitude saved Nolan's life. Had all the devices gone off, they would certainly have bitten a chunk out of the earth that would have included not only Nolan, but the entire factory and a good portion of its neighbor as well. Nolan did not escape without injury, but he escaped, with the memory of who had escaped before him at his expense intact. Oxygen is nearly out. The canister is still in motion, and all the while it remains that way. Nolan cannot disengage the suction pads, for only once the canister has stopped is it safe to open the lid, for only then is it likely to be inside the express area of the storage facility. Avoiding being crushed on entry was only one half of the problem, and now he faces the second half, and all he can do is wait. If he releases the pads before he reaches the express area, the canister will be detected, resealed, and diverted into the hermetic long-term quarantine unit. The canister will no longer be commanded to collapse in on itself, as is the case with the perimeter defenses, but the consequences for Nolan would be equally grave, so he must wait until the canister stops, however desperate he is to do otherwise. Nolan's limbs are jerking violently, his elbows and knees crashing into the sides of the canister as he starts to lose control. His chest starts heaving as he gulps for air, all thoughts and mental images expiring into the void of gradual asphyxiation. He senses a change in momentum. The canister's stopped. He thinks he can't sense any movement, but he's not sure he's in a position to tell anymore. He's not sure that his need hasn't erroneously convinced him of its truth. He hesitates, still not knowing, and sensing that the time has passed when such knowledge is possible. He hits the release button on the ratchet device, pushes decompress on the top pad, and kicks the lid off with his feet. The lid flies up in the air, and as he watches it revolve in the blue light, he grabs for his weapon and scrambles into a kneeling position, his neck open, pulsating, his already diminished vision now murky and inconstant. Hearing nothing but the whirring of machinery, he guesses his breach of the canister has so far gone undetected. He crouches back down inside and waits for his vision to improve. When he looks again, a white-smocked lab porter is standing alongside the canister, looking right at him through slatted chrome goggles. Nolan sets off a blast without bothering to correct his aim. A fuzz of metal issues from the barrel, half of which catches the lab porter in the neck. His head slumps into his right shoulder and slides down his back onto the floor, a snowman melting in the sun. It is not until Nolan has clambered free of the canister and collided with it while making his exit that the headless body finally topples over. Nolan is quick to remove himself from the main intake area, and after following numerous narrow corridors, each of which is punctuated with many unnumbered windowless doors, he enters a corridor wider than the rest, at the end of which is an elevator. He runs towards it. As he closes in on the elevator, its doors part, revealing a scientist from the labs upstairs and another porter. Without slowing down, Nolan fires a shot from waist height, which rips through their stomachs. They stand in the entrance to the elevator, looking down at their mutilated midriffs, more confounded than terror-struck. As Nolan barges through the middle of them, they spill all over the marble floor, and he is forced to shove their remains out of the way with his foot to stop the elevator doors from jamming. He rides the elevator to the ground floor, his gun trained on the doors all the way up. The doors open on the western end of Lab South 5. Directly in front of him, he can see the main lab complex, and to his left, the first of 10 white cubes. Without being certain which of these offers the best chance of finding Smithson, he instinctually finds himself heading in the direction of the main lab complex, and being distrustful of the force of this completely groundless conviction, he corrects his route, heading off instead in the direction of the living quarters. There's a clear path to Smithson's block. Nolan sprints towards it, the inflamed undercarriage of the sky mirroring his progress. As he places his palm on the white wall, he sees a suited figure reflected in the window. Nolan's unborn skin flickers as the first blow completes its arched descent. His legs sag momentarily from the hips. 3 more blows put him on his knees. His upper half stoops into the jagged shale as they drag him back to the main body of the lab.